American Eagle's new ad featuring Sydney Sweeney and the tagline "Great Jeans" sent the brand stock soaring nearly 10%, but also sparked backlash over alleged racial undertones tied to her blonde hair, blue-eyed image. The campaign has ignited debate over whether this marks the end of woke advertising or just another viral controversy. Now, do you think, Ben, that this kind of controversy is actually part of the strategy now?
It is absolutely part of the strategy for certain types of campaigns. And there's a very sort of simple way to tell, is controversy worth it? So basically, you want to see a couple different metrics. One, you want to see that the reach you can get from the controversy is enhanced by at least 50%. So if you didn't do the controversy, this is the typical reach you'd expect, let's say for a partnership with a celebrity. By doing the controversy, do we see an uptick in overall reach by 50%? But that's only the first part. The other part you need to see is that, does the benefits of the celebrity tie-in outweigh the negative sales conversion that happens from some negative controversy? So basically, on average, I think when we look at campaigns, we'll see about a 20% reduction in sales conversion if there's a negative element to it, even with widespread awareness. The average celebrity bump that you get from some sort of connecting a product with a celebrity is typically anywhere from 10 to 30%. So the whole question is the probably on average 20% reduction in sales conversion, can that be compensated by the celebrity? If you pick the celebrity poorly, let's say the lift is 10%, then no, there's a net loss. But if you pick the celebrity really well, then there could be maybe a 30% bump or even higher. So I actually think in this case, I ran through some of the numbers, and if you look at the typical, like let's say reach for American Eagle in a year, they're going to get 2.4 billion impressions from their just normal advertising work. That's what I calculated out for a recent year. In this week, since the Sydney Sweeney ad, they received about 4.3 billion impressions. So about twice the number they get in a year. This is definitely a win in terms of exposure. Now, because of the Sydney Sweeney tie-in with, she's kind of the it girl of the moment, a hot person a lot of people talk about, it seems like it's a good fit. And really, they weren't flying blind here, because the actual ad is really an homage to Brooke Shields in the 80s for Calvin Klein. There is an ad where she's talking about sort of genetics and how it works, and she's putting on these pair of jeans.
Genes are fundamental in determining the characteristics of an individual and passing on these characteristics to succeeding generations.
So it's very similar. They sort of shortened it, they updated it, they did more variations, but it's very, very similar. Both metrics, overall reach, yes. Celebrity tie-in to compensate for negativity, yes. And then finally, when you look at so this for the brand perspective, the final lens we want to see is, does this make sense for the brand? So American Eagle has historically been a more sort of like inclusive brand, bring people into the tent. If you want to call it woke approach, you could say that. So is this worth it? Well, in the context of the brand, it is, because they need to do something to be more relevant. I mean, their stock price, if you look at it, has gone down a third this year. They are not relevant in terms of the conversation. They've been historically a very relevant brand for Generation Z. Now, maybe less so. So they need to do something. So embracing this in the context of stock going down, need to do something to rev up the brand. So I think the final factor in this, Tom, is that it is a very good product tie-in. So you can, use controversy in lots of different ways. It could have nothing to do with your product. In this case, controversy is directly focused on the jeans from the point of view of their business strategy. They want to be the brand known for, like, we are the best place for Gen Z or younger audiences to go get jeans. They are putting a lot of focus on that, and they're doing that with a celebrity who's hot, who can compensate for the negativity, and the negativity is basically doubling their reach of a year in just 1 week.
Well, going back to the jeans, what did you think of the ad?
I really like the ad because I like that the controversy centers around the product. That's important for this, because there are people like, Kanye West can generate a lot of controversy, but a lot of his controversy, which can be, horrible things he says or alludes to, doesn't relate back to the product. So it's just a negative drag on everything. In this case, it actually does relate to the product. The product is featured a lot in the ad. And so like everyone is talking about American Eagle jeans now. And I don't think anyone was talking about American Eagle jeans unless I wasn't, prior to this ad. So I think it has really shifted the conversation, made American Eagle brand much more relevant. In addition to that, I think it makes sense for this particular brand to do this because of the nature of their audience. So when this really misfires, is like, kind of like Bud Light, because Bud Light, when they, sort of said like, okay, let's adopt this more, quote unquote, woke advertising. Let's have like a trans influencer in our ad. The issue with their brand is it is widely, a core audience of the brand is probably like a right-wing audience that the minute they saw that ad said, hey, we don't support this. However, American Eagle, more limited audience, more niche, and it sort of makes sense for a fashion brand, especially, to be controversial. I mean, there's sort of like in fashion, it deals with trends, it deals with edginess. This makes sense for this brand a lot more than Bud Light.
So let us know, do you think this ad is proof that sex still sells, or that we've learned absolutely nothing about representation in 2025? President Trump, backed by DNI Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, claims that Barack Obama orchestrated a treasonous conspiracy by manipulating intelligence to undermine Trump's 2016 win. But fact checkers and bipartisan investigations have found no evidence to support these allegations, while Obama's team calls the claims a weak political distraction. Now, Obama thinks this is a distraction. You think this is a distraction. What's he distracting from?
Donald Trump is channeling his inner Don Draper from Mad Men, who famously said, if you don't like what they're saying, change the conversation.
If you don't like what is being said, change the conversation.
When you are president of the United States, basically you have the most attention in this attention economy on you. You have this lever that only very few people have, which is like you can get hundreds of millions of views, impressions, discussions on anything you do. So if you don't like the conversation, you have this ability. And I think this is the first clear example of like sometimes people say like, oh, Trump's not strategic. Oh, he's just like saying things off the cuff. He's like, people have the view of like, if you remember like the movie, I think it was Up, where it's like squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. Like Trump just operates like that, right? There's an element of that, but this is super strategic because he knows that he can pick a fight with someone, he can shine a light on a topic, and that just drowns out conversations that he doesn't want to have. So he clearly doesn't want to have the conversation about what is his connection with Jeffrey Epstein and to what extent does it goes. And that is not good for him. And that's especially problematic for his base because this is a very big issue for the base. So what does he do? Well, he can come up with a number of topics. Washington Commanders renaming. Should the NFL team be the Washington Redskins or the Washington Commanders? He doesn't have anything to do with this. He has no power in this. It doesn't matter what his opinion is, but he knows that. And Tom, I looked online. I mean, we're looking at about 950 million impressions for that story. So it's like, okay, got 950 million impressions. I can sort of distract and put them over here. Now, what other stories do you have? The government, they can do things like release the JFK files, release the FBI files on Martin Luther King. So I looked at that. What's the coverage of that? Oh, 500 million. 520 million is what I calculate on the exposure of that. So you start adding this up, right? 900 million, 500 million, 500 million. What's some of his weak distractions? They're talking about renaming the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you saw this, after Melania Trump. Okay, where it's going to be that's going to get a ton of people, like, kind of the premier art center in the U.S. We're going to name after his wife. That's going to get a couple people on. So what's that? That's at about 350 million impressions. Okay, what's another one? Here's a kind of the weak sauce school of distraction. Fights with Rosie O'Donnell. Trump says he's going to take away Rosie O'Donnell's U.S. citizenship if she doesn't want to live here. That's about 250 million impressions. That's sort of the weak sauce. But the point I want to say is that if you add all this stuff up, it adds up to a lot of impressions that counterbalances the biggest story going on, which is the Epstein story. Plus, he has things that I wouldn't even qualify as distractions that he can just generate news with, right? New tariff deal with EU, new tariff deal with Japan. Those all add into this. So when you have this massive story, you can sort of drown it out by trying all these things. And what I would say, just to bring this back to Obama, is Obama, that story, from what I can tell, is the single best performing story for shifting the conversation, because it is negative about another president, which is not him. And it's and I calculate that at about 1.1 billion impressions right now across mass media and social media for the story. It's a big story, and it actually speaks to his base, because the one story that they might care as much about as Jeffrey Epstein, which is just there is a deep state, there's a cabal. The fix is in. The whole world is run by this shadowy group. And there's this sort of mythology that's built around Obama related to this. So basically what he's trying to do is say, hey, I don't want you to talk about me in regard to Epstein. Talk about Obama instead. And then when you combine this with all of the other stories, you're talking about someone who can generate billions of impressions or discussions about topics. This is an effective strategy. So if there's one thing that is clear, this is not happenstance. This is by design. And you can see it ineffective. Rosie O'Donnell, not as relevant right now. Pick a fight with her. Very effective, President Obama, from the point of view of distraction.
How does this work from a PR perspective? Obviously, you've been in PR as a PR expert for a long time, but how does this work, do you think, for Trump? Do you think there's a team of people that sit around behind the scenes with Trump or just planning these distraction techniques? Or do you think Trump just randomly says these things, like he's naturally gifted at saying, look over there, something shiny?
Yes and yes. I just think he has a tendency to ramble. He has a tendency to say things off the cuff. And then sometimes it strikes a chord, right? You're like, I'm just going to comment on something. And like, wow, we had a huge uplift talking about the Washington Commanders. Look at all of that discussion. Look at all of that there. Let's lean into it more. This is a useful technique. So I think it's a combination of both.
Let's know what you think. Is Trump finally exposing a political cover-up, or just weaponizing conspiracy to keep his base angry? According to research from NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, most Americans say they use AI mostly for searching information, while far fewer rely on it for tasks like email, writing, shopping, or brainstorming. Young adults, especially under 30, are adopting AI more regularly, with around 74% using it at least occasionally and nearly 60% tapping it for idea generation. Now, Ben, how does this adoption of this technology compare with early adoption for something like e-commerce?
It is incredibly faster, the adoption right now. It is accelerated. I think people forget that, like, kind of, when sort of I guess they would call it back in there, like the four horsemen of e-commerce when they started. I mean, I'm talking about like eBay, Amazon. This was like circa 1994, 1995. I don't think we had the mainstream view of e-commerce as something that just people generally do until probably 20 years later. Probably we're talking about from 1995 to maybe like 2015. It took 20 years. What I would say is we are only sort of like 1 to 2 years into the sort of like mainstream start usage of AI. We are not there yet for the shopping piece, but that is coming. And all of the numbers that we see compared to internet usage are up much faster. I mean, basically, people already have the muscle of researching digitally, buying digitally. And now it's just a tool that's incredibly effective to do this faster. So I think we are seeing just the acceleration of this will be probably, 1 year equals 4 in internet terms. What I expect is that we are seeing, like, I would say, widespread adoption of AI-based shopping within 3 years. Probably 3 to 4 years, I would say.
At what stage do you think we are right now with AI? Like, at what sort of part of like the product cycle? It feels like what you're saying is everyone's going to catch up with it.
2026 is going to be like the year 2000 in e-commerce. And what I'm saying is, like, that was probably 5 or 6 years after really the start, but we're already at there now. What I mean by that is, in that year, if you remember year 2000, it was like 20% of people had bought something online. It wasn't really, and they bought like one thing. It wasn't really widespread. People were starting to use it. E-commerce at the time, I think, was less than 1% of sales. I think we're going to see some similar. Like by next year, we're going to have like, maybe 1 in 5 people bought something that they found through AI. It's not a huge part of sales yet, but then wait till 2027, wait till 2028.
In 2000, I vividly remember believing that all the computers are going to blow up and shut down.
Yeah, Y2K, all of that. And which has a funny parallel to is AI taking over the world, the Y2K of this era of technology, where everyone was worried and nothing really happens. I think it all comes down to, Tom, I don't know if you watch this. If you watch Mission Impossible, the movie Dead Reckoning, where AI has the potential to take over all of our digital infrastructure. If you've watched that movie, you're scared. If you haven't watched that movie, then maybe you're okay.
Are you actually using AI to get ahead, or are we all just pretending it's changing our lives while we keep using it like a search bar? Let's move on to the campaign of the week.
Campaign of the week. Campaign of the week.
Okay, so after Astronomer's CEO and HR head were involuntarily viral sensations via Coldplay's Kiss Cam and subsequently resigned, the data firm hired Gwyneth Paltrow, ex-wife of Coldplay's frontman, as a humorous, tongue-in-cheek, temporary spokesperson to pivot attention towards its core business. Now, this seems again like another example of the distraction technique, which is kind of the theme of today's episode, it feels like. Now, do you think hiring Paltrow was the perfect PR move or a distraction from real accountability?
I like the thought and the idea. I didn't like the execution as much of the actual ad. So the thought and idea is funny because obviously she's a celebrity. Yeah. But she's actually connected to Chris Martin, who's the lead singer of Coldplay, which is, of course, where, the concert where all of this happened. So I like that idea. I like that thought. The idea is to sort of change things to like what the company is about and to show that the company's here, still standing, has a sense of humor about it. I like all that. I think is good. I would just have in the actual creative of that ad, she's kind of, it's like they're sort of, tongue in cheek, just talking about like what their product does. And I would have loved to see a little bit more like winks and nods and other things. So I think that it was kind of like she was underutilized, but I like the impulse. I think it was probably the right impulse to like make fun of ourselves a little bit. I just think that like it could have been connected a little bit better. And they could have had more viral moments. Like just imagine, I don't know, you sort of have like if Gwyneth Paltrow were to recreate the meme that everyone's using, kind of like the two people, one standing in front of the other at the concert, and then they're kind of like scared because they're caught.
Here's a follow-up question to a story that the same story, but that we covered, the astronomer thing that we covered a week or so ago. You sort of talked about what the ex-CEO should do from a PR perspective. Like, he should own it. He should come up and just say, look, I made a mistake. I'm human. I'm working on myself. I'll be better, this kind of thing. Now, I've read very recently that he is planning to sue Coldplay over the incident. Is that the right thing to do?
I think it is a way to, maybe extract some economic value out of that. He clearly has damages from this. I think this might cause the cancellation of kiss cams if he does this all over. But I don't think it's the right play long term for him, because I still think that this is a chance. I think this is something you do when you don't have any other options. This is the only thing that's possible. But I don't think it's the right play for deflecting ownership of what happened. I think the classic crisis communications move is you need to accept ownership. You need to give context. You need to show that you're a good person. This says this is not your fault.
Talk to us about Gwyneth. Is hiring a celebrity to fix your PR mess genius marketing, or is it a desperate distraction from actual bad behavior? Okay, so last week we talked about the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show, and you gave us some facts and figures about the show versus Joe Rogan. Now, we clipped that up, we stuck it on TikTok, and 40,000 plus views later, 200 plus comments later, we're going to respond to a few comments. Now, I'm just going to read them out to you, Ben. If you have an answer, let me know. At Brad says, these numbers are imaginary. The Colbert Report does about 90 episodes per year at about 1.2 million per episode. That's close to 100 million per season. The ad revenue is 200K to 1 million per 30-second spot. You have 22 minutes of available ad space in a show. Your eCPM numbers are all way off.
Appreciate the calculation. We were doing more of a back of the envelope calculation. And what I can say is that like premium CPMs for premium spots can run as high as $40. We weren't calculating all of the like potential impressions they could have in an episode, but I would argue that Joe Rogan, which was the comparison, that Joe Rogan, despite being incredibly well paid, is a better deal than Stephen Colbert because of his production costs. He can also run multiple impressions in his episodes. He could mimic Stephen Colbert's, and probably he has more territory to do it in because the Colbert show, short compared to podcast Joe Rogan, quite long, and he has the potential because of the nature of podcasting to actually do more episodes. So we could probably debate back and forth and say how many impressions are actually in there, but just keeping things to do this comparison. Basically, Joe Rogan, half the price of Stephen Colbert because of the production cost, and he has more exposure. That's definitely true.
Okay, second one on calculations. Big Tweezy's Q for life says, flawed calculations. What about income for advertising and viewership?
Income for advertising and viewership, I don't totally get that one, but certainly what I'd say is that the income aside, if you're talking about income besides advertising, that is true. The problem is that just goes more in Joe Rogan's favor. Stephen Colbert is not known for being a prolifically shared social media figure in the way that Jimmy Fallon is. So that's another reason why he got downsized. High cost, high production, less social reach. Joe Rogan gets shared more.
At Jar says, obviously a one-man podcast is going to cost less to run than a television show with an audience, a band, producers, and so forth. That's not news.
That actually is the news, which is that these high production cost shows are going to really struggle because in the attention economy, you can get attention without all of that production. I mean, here's an example, Tom. It's like the difference between you could go film a big budget alien action movie that costs, $500 million to produce, or you could potentially go, if you remember back in the day, like the Blair Witch Project movie, right? Which was like handheld, inexpensive. I think it was under $100,000. And the problem is you can still make money doing the $500 million movie, but you better make sure that you get a ton of attention, a ton of eyeballs to justify that cost, because you can also do this, getting attention, holding up your iPhone to yourself and just talking as well. So in the attention economy, if you're going to spend, you better make sure you get reach and return for that spend. In Stephen Colbert's case, he just can't justify it.
At Capped Broadway says, calling Joe Rogan a big-time celebrity is telling.
I think he's a big-time celebrity at this point. I would put him at least as well known as Stephen Colbert, wouldn't you? I don't think we have to debate that.
That's kind of a nothing comment. He absolutely is a big time celebrity. The biggest podcaster in the world, a UFC MMA commentator, like martial artist, comedian.
But I think what's telling is that he comes up in a conversation when we debate what happened in the 2024 election between Trump and Kamala Harris. He is a central figure in whether she went on that show or not. And Trump did, she didn't. I mean, we can debate the merits of that, but I think at this point he is a celebrity influencer at the highest level.
Okay, well, forgive me for this username. User 30919223554 says Colbert was not doing late night comedy. He was doing left-wing political show.
I think a fair comment that it had a certain point of view. What I think is just interesting is he was doing a expensive show that probably leaned a bit to the left. And I just think our point is that the economics of that are not going to work moving forward unless you have outsized attention and reach that is different than what you can get from a low production show. And I think, sort of having a focus that appeals to a certain member of the political spectrum, I think that's fine. You can have a niche core audience, but it is also going to shrink your audience a little bit. So that probably did not work in Stephen Colbert's favor in this. Fair point. I'd maybe diffuse it a little bit, but I get the point.
And the final, another comment, not the final one because there were hundreds, but there's the ones that we picked. Another user has a long string of numbers after it. One guess, podcast at least have the possibility of being honest, uncensored, and not controlled by the mass media.
Which I think is a fair point in just the democratization of media. I mean, I think Stephen Colbert his sort of cancellation is a byproduct of that. Like, media is much more democratic. If you're, in every point, and I think even just how a social media has trended, right, Tom? It's like we used to say, hey, how many followers you had was going to matter. But now we know that, hey, we can do a segment, put it on TikTok and get 40,000 people watching and hundreds of comments, based on the content. So I think that is the biggest change right now, is that it is more democratic. It is less controlled. It is more of a meritocracy. The only difference is it's a meritocracy based on the attention you can get. Doesn't mean you have to be right, but you do have to be talked about.
That's all the comments we're going to answer right now. The comments are still ongoing currently because as the views rack up. So if more come up, perhaps we'll mention them next week. But if you guys out there watching this have any comments on today's stories, please let us know. Drop them in the comments down below. This week, we've learned genes can move markets. Treason can trend without evidence. AI is still just a smarter Google for most people. And if your CEO gets caught on the kiss cam with HR, just call Gwyneth or Ryan Reynolds. He's pretty good at that too, right?
Or Sydney Sweeney.
Yeah. Oh,
or
true.
Anyone else that can give you a wink and a nod and a celebrity bump in conversion rate to offset the negative news.
See you next week.
Cheers.